Okay, Black Panther Wakanda Forever has come to Disney Plus, the sequel to one of my favorite Marvel movies. Could it win me back? Could it draw me in any way back toward the MCU? Stick around and I'll share my thoughts. I'm Peter Franson from christiangeekcentral.com and Spirit Blade Productions. This is my uncut review of Black Panther Wakanda Forever. The synopsis on IMDb reads, "The people of Wakanda fight to protect their home from intervening world powers as they mourn the death of King T'Challa." Let me give my brief, in a nutshell, thoughts before freely going into spoilers, and I'll let you know when that's going to happen. I would say this is the most serious thing from the MCU in a while, but that's not saying very much. I feel like it has a very scattered story, unfocused character arcs, unfocused themes, too many characters. It felt like I was watching the vision, heart, and style of the first movie struggling to remain present, to find solid ground, while also being kind of victimized by the cookie-cutter aspects of most MCU movies since Avengers Endgame. So that's it for my nutshell thoughts. I'm going to get into details and spoilers now. Last warning to skip this video or skip ahead in the podcast if you're listening that way. Here we go. As far as the story and the script, the pacing, the tone, all those kinds of elements that make this animal what it is, it's written and directed by the same people who wrote and directed the first movie, which surprised me to look up and find because it felt so different, and it felt like I would expect a script and story to feel if there were, too many cooks in the kitchen. I was prepared to see like a laundry list of writers attached to the script because of just how all over the place it felt like in my experience. Now, with the passing of Chadwick Boseman, who of course played Black Panther, they had the really unenviable challenge of moving forward in a completely, unexpected direction they were not planning on, and to make a good movie out of that. And I think I felt the results of that struggle as I watched this movie. They spent time establishing Namor as a villain, and that's good to spend time on your villain and to give him a background that you kind of relate to or sympathize with or at least understand in some way. So I thought that was good. I think that they didn't need to. I think it could have been done more efficiently, and they were also spending what I thought was unneeded time on numerous supporting characters, when really, since T'Challa was the main character and Shuri and the other supporting cast members were all supporting cast members, really what I wanted to see was one new cast member really come to the front and be given the time and attention to be developed as a character that I could care about. I really would have preferred Shuri to be the true lead. I mean, they basically, in the final trailers for this movie, spoiled the fact that, yeah, she becomes Black Panther. And so if they... maybe that's a choice made late in production, but I think that many of us already suspected going in that was going to be the case, and I don't think there was a reason to kind of keep it a surprise, or even like they were necessarily trying to keep it a secret who of the supporting cast will become the next Black Panther. I think that we all reasonably could conclude in the first 30 minutes it's probably going to end up being Shuri, right? And so I wish they would have just leaned into Shuri, made her the true lead of this movie, and she does naturally stand out in this movie, but I want this movie to be her journey. As the new Black Panther, I want to connect with who she is, but her arc is mostly about her grief and anger. Her arc is about her brother and her dealing with the loss of her brother, not showing us, in addition to that, who she is, apart from the surfacey personality quirks and traits we already know about her already. And even the arc that they were giving her related to her brother's grief was competing for time with the supporting cast and stuff going on with them. Now, I guess, you want to call it Wakanda Forever. You could argue, well, with a title like that, we should have expected it was a story about the people of Wakanda. I don't know. You still put Black Panther in the title. And so I think that it needs to really come to a focus faster than it did. And I'll actually reference a timestamp that will give you a better perspective on it, maybe. I felt like Everett Ross and Valentina Allegra de Fontaine, holy crap, what a name, they were included, I felt, to help set up something in the future with them, or remind us of who they are for the sake of something that's coming up. I don't know. I just we didn't need all this time with these characters. The stuff that happened as a result of their scenes could have been done much more quickly and efficiently. Riri Williams, the character who is kind of like a young genius lady, and she's able to build armor like Iron Man and stuff, that all that definitely felt like setup for an Iron Man spin-off character. I mean, by the end of the movie, she's leaving the Wakanda cast, and so it's not like they're even building her up to be a part of the Wakanda cast in the Black Panther trilogy. They're just bringing her in, showing us who she is, and then sending her off for her own adventures, and it just felt like a clear setup for some kind of Iron Man spin-off character. But this approach feels presumptuous, at least to me, because the MCU, if the MCU was a person and they had a relationship with me that was kind of broken and kind of becoming fading and distant, well, at this point, they need to win me back, not assume that they can sacrifice story quality for the sake of setting up something else that they expect me to want. Now, I have no idea what the stats are on like the movies and how MCU is doing, so maybe they have every reason to say, we've got our audience, But that's what it seems like it was. It seems like a movie, an audience made for an audience that they are already assuming is interested and on board with whatever gets put in front of them and is just hungry for whatever they can get and will gobble up anything that's presented to them. That's kind of how decisions like that come across to me in this movie. Okay, so that timestamp I was going to mention. This movie is 2 hours and 40 minutes long. Oh man, was that a Freudian slip? 2 hours and 40 minutes long, give or take a minute or two, I think. And I actually checked the timestamp. It took 1 hour, 58 minutes, and 30 some seconds maybe out of that 2 hour, 40 minute runtime. An hour and 58 minutes, just shy of 2 hours. That was the point that Shuri first put on the Black Panther suit and officially took up the mantle. That is twice as long as I've ever seen it take for a superhero to put on a suit in their origin story. Now, could we argue this is Shuri's origin story? Well, yes, but then you really aren't focusing on her like you would in other superhero movies' origin stories as the hero, and this is their origin story. And again, it's an origin story that's based on reaction to grief of her brother's death, not about really her. At the same time, we've had Black Panther in his own movie and in more than one other movie before then, so the Black Panther concept itself does not need the kind of time to build up the concept that you would in an origin story movie. So 2 hours before the titular character puts on the suit and does something in the suit, that is ridiculously long for me. That's way too long. I'd be more understanding if they had poured into exploring her character and motives more during that time. But by the time it happened, it almost felt arbitrary for her to put on the suit. Like, well, this movie's going to end soon. We better get this suit on, or almost out of obligation, or rather than something that was really being led up to dramatically. And the Black Panther fights and action that followed didn't remotely live up to what the character did in previous movies. I wanted Shuri to take the mantle and make it her own in this movie. Instead, it felt like she is the Black Panther only because her brother isn't around to do it, and someone's got to do it, Now, yes, there is a revenge arc that strongly plays out with her in the end. That does reflect more than the understandable grief. It's her reaction to the grief. It's still all in the context of her brother. I understand they got to deal with that mourning process, but at the beginning they've got the whole cast mourning, and then they skip ahead and say 1 year later. And yes, of course, mourning takes longer than a year. Of course it does. But I don't really have a sense coming away from this movie of who Shuri is apart from the context of her brother. And I wanted to know who Shuri is inside somehow, apart from, again, those quirks and those external quirks and traits that we've seen in her in previous movies. I wanted to know who she is, what drives her, apart from just reacting to the death of her brother, So I feel like there's still another movie left to do that. And I'm like, I wanted this movie to do that, So anyway, it felt like even her revenge arc was built up so little until it was suddenly the main focus. Thematically and dramatically, this movie just kind of felt all over the place. Of course, though not as often, it had to have some forced jokes to keep it light for the kiddies, I guess. I don't really get that still. It lacked also important grounding in logic that even early MCU movies had. And you can make a direct comparison to Iron Man here. If you remember in the first Iron Man movie, when he started going up in the air, if he got high enough, his suit started freezing over, and that was a problem that he had to deal with. Gosh, we haven't had that kind of realism in a Marvel movie in a long time. But it really came out to me in this movie when a character who's in an Iron Man inspired suit goes up. Now maybe they weren't going as high as Tony Stark, so maybe the suit wouldn't be freezing over. That's fine, I understand that. We didn't get an apples to apples comparison here, but she doesn't have any kind of covering. She's not encased completely in a suit. And as she goes up, she's starting to be deprived of oxygen, but I didn't see her in her performance reacting to the cold. I don't think they even said anything about the cold. And AI was telling her, you are running out of oxygen, or the oxygen at this altitude is a blah, blah, blah percent or whatever. And I heard that chiming in from the AI, but I didn't, if you would have turned the volume off, I wouldn't have sensed that she was struggling to breathe from her performance. And it's, or that there was any cold or discomfort in particular really going on. She seemed focused, but and that's what a lot of what we get. We get focus face from a lot of Marvel action sequences and stuff. We don't get much more deep emotional struggling or physical struggling and stuff very often. It's usually just we're content with focus face and call it a day. There's also at one point a normal car that is able to be driven remotely by attaching a small sci-fi device to it. We didn't even see something like, I don't know, nanotechnology oozing and spreading throughout the car, something that could help build a bridge between that little device and this car running on its own, And so at some point, it just feels too much like magic to me. And then I'm just like, well, then where's the tension? Because if you can just stick a little sci-fi device on there and suddenly it's driving a car, how do I know you can't pull out some other device that can magically fix whatever problem might be placed in front of, the heroes? There needs to be a sense of limitations based in reality, and like many other Marvel movies, I wasn't feeling it here, which is sad because I definitely sensed more of that kind of limitation in the first Black Panther movie as they established what the suit does, how it absorbs kinetic energy and stuff like that. There was some explanation, some rationalization going on there, and there just didn't seem to be an effort or an interest in that in this movie. There's a spear that is pulled out of Shuri's abdomen at one point that had zero blood on it. And that would not have been too gory for a PG-13 movie. At that point, we're looking at what I assume is a tonal choice that it just keeps tension removed from the situation or keeps it at a minimum or something. And I just don't understand why I understand it's Disney. I understand they want to keep it accessible to families, but I don't understand why they seem to sometimes go above and beyond to keep any sense of dramatic weight or stakes from coming into their movies. I don't know why they seem so bent on that. Anyway, as far as the cast and the performances go, I really felt like this was, a lot of it was returning. It was almost exclusively returning cast. I felt all of them were solid, and there were even some great bursts, some great moments of acting when characters were dealing with grief. Or mixes of sadness and grief and anger and stuff, and in those moments it was like, oh, we're doing a different movie now. Okay, what is this? And I like sad and heavy stuff. So you might say, well, I think that's just you liking your sad and your heavy mopey stuff, Pater. But no, I mean, it was really the acting was elevated in those scenes. It's not that in the lighter scenes there was, because there can be some real performance going on to do some quirky, interesting, subtle things in comedy. And I didn't sense in the lighter moments that it was like, oh, wow, they're really doing some interesting, skillful stuff with acting. They were just doing solid throughout. But then, really it was amped up in these scenes, and it was, But it didn't last. It was these short bursts. And I think none of that was helped by the fact that, like many MCU movies, the dialogue is very expositional. It's very tell, don't show. And it left little room for performance to tell the story, So as far as stunts and visuals go, lots of CG, even when they were creating real-world animals like elephants. Elephants not doing crazy stuff, but elephants just being elephants. I'm like, why are you doing CG elements here, And it just gave me the impression, I don't know what's going on behind the scenes. If I wanted to be jaded, I could just boldly state, I think this is what's going on behind the scenes. There's plenty of that on the internet. I want to try to avoid that. I'm just going to tell you the impression. The impression to me was that they're not really interested in really making high caliber films here. Now, some people might say, well, that's where they've been for a while. But it just seemed really, especially on display, when here we have a scene a quiet scene where these characters are sitting by a lake or a pond or something like that in Africa. And I'm like, why not go on location? The lighting, you clearly seem to be on a set. You look away, we see the CG elephants, and I'm just like, why? Was it really that much? Would it really have been that much more expensive or complicated or whatever to get these actors on a plane? These actors don't strike me as like huge stars right now that are going to be super busy. It seems like you could have worked this into the schedule. I don't know. It just seemed like part of a cookie cutter churning out process that somebody maybe said it would just be easier to do it this way. And that's a bummer, because I think that superheroes are such fertile ground for telling such fantastic stories, and for really, if you take them seriously as properties, they can be really great springboards for high caliber filmmaking. And I feel like the Marvel movies are just not being valued in that way, and that's unfortunate. I understand that they're doing what they got to do to make money and all that kind of stuff, and who knows what's going on behind the scenes. But it's just a bummer to kind of see something like that as like, oh, it would have been great to just have this scene that's supposed to be kind of quiet and emotional feel real. Feel like it. There was a nice scene at the very end with Shuri, I think. That almost felt like when she was mourning her brother and burning her mourning clothes, and to end on such a nice quiet moment, that felt like some really nice filmmaking, and the way what they were doing with the lens and the camera and stuff, I was like, this almost felt like an indie drama for a second here. It was one of those like, oh, we're doing a different movie moments, that just... I don't know what's going on there. Anyway, as far as themes, is there anything of moral, philosophical, or spiritual significance going on in the themes of this thing that might trigger some worthwhile thought or conversation? Well, I think that letting go of revenge is probably an intended theme. Certainly it's an intended kind of character arc type thing going on with Shuri. What's noteworthy to me is that it seemed to be that the reason to let go of revenge is really self-centered and is more about self-healing than it is about actually recognizing that revenge is an immoral desire, that it is not virtuous to desire revenge and to carry out revenge. And I think that's what you have to do when you're coming from a secular, naturalistic, atheistic viewpoint. When you're trying to build a moral framework apart from God, then you have to kind of make it self-centered, relativistic and stuff. But it really ultimately is empty at the end of the day when it becomes about self-healing. Because what if someone comes along and they're not interested in self-healing? Well, then what kind of conversation do you have with them? If they just want to hang on to their grief and their bitterness and stuff like that, of course, it's going to differ person to person. Maybe a conversation with that kind of person isn't going to go anywhere, but at least on a logic basis, on a philosophical basis, on a truth basis, you would have a foundation if you're starting with some objective truths, some objective moral realities that are objectively grounded. And without that, it's just ultimately really, really strong preferences on everyone's part, and that's only going to take you so far in conversations about the really important things in life. Maybe there's some stuff related to belief in an afterlife. I don't know. Largely, the dramatic weight in this movie is light or flat to me, except in rare bursts, as I said. And so as a result, a lot of the themes get lost along the way as well. All right, I have no idea what your tastes are in movies, but if I were a time traveler, I'd go back in time and say, Peter, skip this one. You loved Black Panther. Easily one of your favorite MCU movies, probably maybe in the top 10, one of your top 10, 15 superhero movies of all time. Really, really loved that movie. And you hope that the sequel to it would break the downward cycle that you're experiencing in your viewing of MCU movies and shows. But this one felt like it was only barely managing to tread water compared to the original. It's rated PG-13 for sequences of strong violence, action, and some language. And those are all my thoughts for now on Black Panther: Wakanda Forever. I'd love to get your thoughts and reactions to this in the comments below. Please like, share, subscribe, anything you want to do to help spread the content around. Really grateful for that. I want to thank the Spirit Blade Insiders for making this review possible. For more info about the benefits of being an insider, go to patreon.com/spiritbladeproductions. Then, of course, I hope you'll check out our podcast and stay connected to all CGC content over at christiangeekcentral.com as we continue to geek out and seek the truth.